Hey, everybody. Great to see all y'all out there in, well, today's graffiti land. Today, we got a great one for you today. I was looking forward to this one. I had to reschedule it due to my interview with Nicholas Schreck. Um, so we delayed it for a couple days, but boy, have I been looking forward to this one. And what are we talking about today? We are talking about this book right here. Fuzz One, A Bronx Childhood. Yes, and I know you're all jealous that I own a copy. Actually, this is my sister's copy. Quite frankly, the one that I own fell apart. I bought it back in 2006, and by 2020, it had fallen to pieces. And I actually had an autographed one directly from Fuzz One himself. I went up in 2007 and interviewed Fuzz One for, well, it turned out to be an entire day when I went up there. And of course, Fuzz remembers that very well, and he's spoken about it on other people's shows. And but that one fell apart, unfortunately, and so I actually chucked it. I didn't realize how rare these books were. And so luckily my sister had a copy and I was able to scan some things. And today we're going to be talking about Fuzz One, graffiti. We're going to be reading some stories. This is a fantastic book, and I can't wait to bring you some of the, well, what I consider some of the best stories out of the book. I just want to let you know that this show today is Fuzz One endorsed. As you all know, Fuzz has been calling Eric Galati the last couple of days, leaving him fun messages, which we've been posting. And so the other day, Eric, Fuzz, and I had a three-way conversation. And I actually invited him on the show today, but technically it wasn't going to work out. But what I'm hoping to do is to catch Fuzz at Van Cortlandt Park one of these days and do a walk and talk with the guy. That would be super duper fun. So hopefully we'll be able to do that, because I recognized back in 2006 or so when I bought this book that, well, we were dealing with a very unique character here. And of course, most of you who've been with me know that I introduced the character of Fuzz One in my Son of Sam series, especially in my first video, which then created a legend of Fuzz One. And of course, we have since walked back a lot of the, well, most of the things that we talked about on that first video. We no longer think Son of Sam was, well, actually, we know Son of Sam wasn't a cult. We know Disco Dave did it alone. We know Dave didn't hang out with any Satanists in the park. So when I say the character of Fuzz One, I actually mean it. I want to make sure that we're differentiating the character in this book of Fuzz One versus the man himself, Vincent Fedorchak, because I believe that the two must be separated out, and we can't think that we're dealing with total historical accuracy here. We are having fun today. We are reading fun stories. But I would caution people, especially those of you out there who still believe in the Son of Sam cult, ridiculous stuff like that, that you realize that it's impossible to, well, when we read some of these stories, we're going to see how, well, it's impossible for a lot of the dialogue to be remembered. So you have to treat this as fun, and that's exactly how I want to treat it. I find the character of Fuzz One and also Vinny Fedorchak himself to be eminently entertaining. I really find this guy to be a very unique and fun individual. So it's my pleasure to bring, well, the first time on the internet where anybody's actually analyzed this book, talked about it, showed you pictures, read some stories. And hopefully we are going to entertain and edify. So to that end, I want to say, of course, thanks to everybody in the chat, particularly my girl Ruby, Moet, Ray J. We got Patrick Lewis from Ethiopia, Linda DB, Norma Jean Garza, Balloon Knot. The gang's all here. Well, of course, guys, what would a show be without my PowerPoint presentation, without my images to show you, to guide us along on this journey today, to talk about really a very classic book. Again, Fuzz One, A Bronx Childhood. So before we get into the book, I actually want to talk a little bit about graffiti, the cultural phenomenon of graffiti, for just a little bit. Set us up a little. Now, I want to preface this by saying I'm no expert. Okay, I'm into the artwork, I'm into the subculture, I'm into the history of it, but I never really studied this, and I'm certainly no expert on the history of graffiti. But graffiti really started in New York City in the mid to late 60s. And by early 1971, people like Tacky 183 here, and this was a Greek dude from the Washington Heights section of Manhattan who just for some reason started going around and writing his name everywhere. And he himself was actually influenced by a very legendary and mythical early graffiti writer who called herself Prey. Now, Prey has, if you look up Prey graffiti online, you'll see that there's mythical stories about this person. She has been called an old homeless lady, a bag lady who used to scratch prey everywhere into payphones, into subway poles. And obviously, this influenced many other people, and Taki 183 was one of them. So this dude right here was one of the early forefathers of graffiti. And look how old this guy is. He's probably, this is from an article from 1971. He looks like he's in his late teens. Remember that everyone back then looked old. This guy could be like 14 years old, right? Um, it's just something weird. Oh, everybody looks so young today when they're older. I don't know. I don't know what that means, but in either case, we're moving on. So Taki 183 was one of the earliest. And of course, graffiti was most synonymous with urban blight, urban decay. Most people in New York City abhorred graffiti. They hated it. They thought that it was, well, one of the worst social forces and phenomenon to ever really hit. And there can be arguments made for that, really, because when you have, well, subways that look like this, it tends to make the urban experience quite unpleasant. However, when we look at these pictures now, no doubt we all who grew up in New York City in the 70s and 80s, and I count myself as one of them, having been born in 1973. I look back on this with a certain sense of nostalgia, and even though this picture shows a very grimy New York, and I would have want to been on that train in real time back then. This shows the real New York. This shows New York before it was Giulianified, before it was Bloombergified, before everyone became, well, a COVIDian, right? Um, and now, of course, New York is a shell of itself, and it's utterly destroyed socially. But I mean, look at these ads. And now on the subway, we have ads from the New York City Health Department telling us to put on our mask, telling us to get shot up with all their shots. But back then, it was just actually advertisements. American Airlines, Newports, El Pico, right? But of course, it's the graffiti here that we're looking at, and of course, this does tend to make the urban experience unpleasant because, quite frankly, a lot of the graffiti was just people putting their names up on the walls. There was not much of an artistic bent to it. Everybody had their little tag, and we'll talk about how Fuzz One got his tag. And so, pictures like this showed a dystopian New York City that was on the verge of breakdown. And, the people did not look very happy and all that stuff. But we could have arguments forever about how real New York actually was back then. So most people went through their days seeing the graffiti mainly on New York City subways, buses, walls. Interestingly enough, many graffiti artists made it a point not to write on private property. I think part of that, of course, was the legal ramifications of that versus doing it on public property. But also, I can't help but think that there was a certain moral and ethical code to all this. Somehow it wasn't as bad to do it on public property. And I actually tend to agree with that. But again, more dystopian pictures of old New York and the real New York. And I love this one because it shows a doyen, right? A denizen, a person who looks like she's from the Upper East Side, wealthy, in or she could have been a bag lady for all we know. But I'm gonna pretend that this lady was was a rich person. And it shows the dichotomy of New York, how the subways equalized all of us. Still do to a certain degree, although now that people don't take the subways as much, it really has become more of a place where people who have to take it, and most people now are actually driving into the city. So, But, this was a place, the New York City subway system, where you would have Upper East Side matrons sitting there on the dirty and disgusting laden seats of the New York City subway, having to sit there amongst, well, all of this graffiti. And of course, graffiti probably goes back to the ancient, as soon as people could write, there was probably graffiti, right? So it's not something that started in New York City in 1968 or Philadelphia in 1965. But graffiti, there probably is a study on it. Ancient graffiti in Greece and Rome and Egypt and all that. But of course, we're talking about the 70s and 80s in New York City. So I love this picture. And of course, graffiti made it to the movies and to television shows. Welcome Back, Kotter, the famous sitcom from the 1970s, started out with a picture of a subway coming out of a tunnel, or maybe on an elevated. I'm not quite sure. And I remember reading about how the graffiti artist, I think it was Stay High 149. I'm not quite sure if that was the person whose graffiti was on the Welcome Back, Kotter intro. But I remember reading about how these guys were so proud and so happy that their art, what they considered their art, made it onto these New York City subways, and of course then was disseminated out to the rest of the world, because the whole point, a lot of this stuff was to get your name out. And of course, this speaks to the anomie and the anonymity and the ennui of the big city, about how people want their names to be out there and how kids wanted to be known. Right now, of course, we do it through YouTube and through TikTok and through viral videos and all that stuff. But back then, that didn't exist. So this was a way that people would communicate with each other. Graffiti artists would say things to each other. There was messages in these, even though we, as the normal citizen back then, couldn't really decipher it for ourselves. But of course, this was a whole subculture. And of course, here we're seeing John Travolta in Saturday Night Fever on a subway. And of course, this is a real subway car. They didn't have to paint this and make a studio set back in 1977, which was of course the height of graffiti. But one thing you're noticing in this picture, whoops, as opposed to this picture and as opposed to this picture, is that you are starting to see the emergence here, and it actually started in the early 70s. But in these pictures, you're starting to see the emergence of a different style of graffiti. Bubble letters, blockbusters, more artistic ways of expressing yourself rather than just scribbling your name on the wall like over here. Okay. And of course, graffiti at its height was extremely artistic. Here we see two of my favorite graffiti writers, Blade, who did this one up here, and Blade over here, right? And look how beautiful that is. And of course, the very famous Lee. So not only did this get their name up, but they did it in an artistic manner. I mean, look at the intricacy, the 3D, the thought that went into this. This is absolutely beautiful stuff. Okay? This is true art, right? The Hand of Doom. And of course, there's a million pictures online of graffiti like this. But of course, graffiti was often thought in the way that the popular thought, the way that most people thought of it, was a phenomenon of young Black and Hispanic kids. And no doubt, there was a lot of young Black and Hispanic kids that did graffiti. Blade was a young Black dude from the East Bronx, and Lee was a Hispanic dude, I believe, from Brooklyn, but don't quote me on that. And of course, here we see early graffiti writers and graffiti gangs and all that. But what a lot of people don't realize is that graffiti was also done quite often by young white kids as well. It's like the most unknown thing out there, even though all the graffiti writers know of all the famous white artists. But a lot of the early graffiti pioneers were actually white, as we saw with that first picture, Taki 183. He was a Greek guy. And of course, out of this entire milieu, my friends, emerged one of these young, early white pioneers of graffiti, Fuzz One, A Bronx Childhood by Vincent Fedorchak. So, of course, I love this picture. Um, it's just tells so much, right? Here's Fuzz, king of his domain, examining his work and all that kind of stuff. And this kid was really, really into it. And so this book, A Bronx Childhood, first of all, it's very thick and has a lot of photos and a lot of stories. It's an extremely entertaining book. But one of the reasons why I like it so much is because, and maybe, and this is goes back to the old days in public school in New York City. This is like made to look like an old public school textbook. The way that the all the old public school textbooks had the exact same hardcover, hard cardboard, thick paper. This is actually an extremely high quality book. And if I had the money, I would finance a reprinting of it because I have a feeling that a lot of people would buy this. You can buy it online. It costs several $100s now if you can find a copy. And of course, the subsequent book to it, Fuzz One, Last of the Old School, is even rarer. I'm not even sure that that made it to like a mass printing like Fuzz One, A Bronx Childhood did. And I had a copy of Fuzz One, Last of the Old School, and that thing just fell to pieces. So I'm an idiot. I put it in my laundry room for someone else to read, not realizing again how rare it was. I had an autographed copy and everything. And that book had some really great stories in it, but it was more like paperback, typewritten, not edited like this book was, and there was no pictures in it whatsoever. So I actually spoke to Fuzz One the other day, and I said, "Dude, you gotta reprint these books, man. This is getting out of hand. Especially now after this show, you're gonna have a lot of people who want to buy these books." So hopefully Fuzz will get it together and he'll get these books printed, and everyone can enjoy it. But because these books are so rare, and because this book, Fuzz One in particular, is a classic of not only the genre, but it's a classic book. To me, it's up there with Huckleberry Finn, Tom Sawyer, all the great classics of literature. I really think that it should be reprinted, and hopefully that'll happen soon. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Let's start diving into the pages of Fuzz One, A Bronx Childhood. So, of course, Fuzz One dedicated this book to one of his most beloved graffiti partners in loving memory of Solid One from a graffiti crew called the Fantastic Partners. And if you go online, you could read all about the Fantastic Partners. They're a very famous graffiti crew. And Solid One was one of the members who, I'm not sure how old he was, maybe 12, maybe 13. I'm not quite sure. Fuzz One, if you're watching, maybe you can fill us in on the deep history. But he was riding on a subway car on the top of a subway car, train surfing, and he was killed. And so there's some very poignant um memories of Solid One in this book, but we're not going to read those because I just picked out three or four of the best stories and I left that one out. But this book is dedicated to Solid One of the Fantastic Partners. And one of the great things about this book is that it's chock full of photographs taken by Fuzz One and probably some of his friends as well. But I would venture to say that Fuzz took most of these photos. And quite honestly, Fuzz One was a extremely talented person when it comes to art and when it comes to photography. If you know anything about framing and headroom and how to pose a shot, most of the pictures that we're going to see in this presentation are classic or absolutely fantastic photographs. So this was a dude with a lot of talent, and of course, the keys to the kingdom. Vincent, right? And that's Fuzz One, clutches stolen train keys in 1976. And of course, this book is all about how they would rack up, right? That's a code for stealing their paint, all their supplies, all their book bags, pens, markers, everything they needed to do graffiti was stolen from the local stores. And we'll read a fun story about that. So why don't we get into it? Here's the introduction. Sergeant Fuzz reporting for duty, 1968. If someone had told me years ago that someday I would write a book, I would have said they were crazy. But here I am, traveling back through the years in my mind, attempting to put it all down on paper. Delving into the past isn't easy, There were some good times and some bad, just as there are for anyone in life, and there are some things that are better left forgotten. It was on a cold night in November of 1970 that my dad drove us to Valparaiso, Indiana to catch the 20th Century Limited train bound for New York City. My mom had told me at the end of September that she and my dad were splitting up. It seemed that she had cried all her tears through the years, and so had spent the last few weeks preparing for a new beginning. I admired her resolve, but I wasn't that strong. It was hard to say goodbye to everything I knew, especially my dad and my dog Duffy. I was 8 years old. Up to this point, I had had a great childhood. We lived in Gary, Indiana, my dad's hometown, in Miller Beach, just 2 blocks south of Lake Michigan. It was a beautiful place in those days. My dad was a country boy, a real Daniel Boone type who loved the outdoors. He taught me how to hunt, fish, and live off the land if I had to. I always felt that he was born 100 years too late. He was a pioneer type, and the 1800s would have suited him just fine. My mom, on the other hand, was a city girl. They'd met in New York while he was on leave from the Navy. I guess somehow they just drifted apart. Gary was a gloomy steel town, and my mom eventually felt that she had overstayed her welcome. I wasn't prepared for the move. How was I to know as the train pulled out of the Valparaiso station and I looked out the train window, barely able to see the sights as my eyes filled with tears, that I would soon enter a whole new world? As I look back now, I know it was destiny for me to make this journey. My mom and I arrived in Penn Station, New York City on November 15th, 1970, and from that day on, my whole life changed. Little did I know that I was soon to enter the world of graffiti. And of course, here is a picture of, I don't know what the hell that is. Here's little Fuzz, I guess in Gary, Indiana. What is this? Are these like rats? I'm not quite sure what this is over here, but here is an example of Fuzz. He was taught by his father how to trap, hunt, just like he said. And of course, Sergeant Fuzz reporting for duty, 1968. Like I said, a lot of great photographs in his collection here. So here's Fuzz One's mom and father. Above, Rosemary Fedorchak, Vincent's mother at Jones Beach in 1954. And I met Vincent's mother when I went up to interview him in 2007, but unfortunately she was very sick, and I just said hello and kind of passed her by while she was in the room. But Fuzz didn't remember. He gave an interview where he said that his mother had just died when we met, but that's not true. His mother was in the house, although, like I said, very sick. Right, Vincent's father on shore leave in New York City, 1953. So, of course, the coming together of these two produced, well, Fuzz One. 1970. And of course, this would never happen nowadays, right? Little 8-year-old kid, 9-year-old kid hanging out with these two adults, train conductor, and God knows who this dude was over here. I have no idea. But a real classic look from the 1970s, right? And there's the famous Fuzz One tag right up there. Birth of a Nation. You should have seen those trains go by. Historic graffiti legends. The writers back then lit up the trains in colorful flames. Ebony Duke, TFD Incorporated, Graffiti Go Club, WAR, writers are respected. Amazing burners soaring through the train stations. Single hits, top to bottoms, window downs, whole cars, floaters, throw-ups, and blockbusters covered the train that floated by. They had flames bursting, crowns on top of letters, stars, stitches, dots, and bubbles. Masterpieces flying by. There was the champagne glass with bubbles and the Playboy bunny with the rabbit ears. One ear up and one ear down. The saint with the joint in his mouth. The top hat with the gloves that came and a cane to match. Remember the spray can man spraying out the name? Or the bomb ready to explode? Pitchforks, arrows, and hearts. Some guys favored the spade or a diamond. So many minds were working at the same time. The real time. The early 70s. I remember the first time my mom, aka Mom 707, brought me on a train. The first time my feet hit the platform, I knew and felt that I belonged there and that the trains and the New York City subway system would be a part of my world. Anyway, my mom and I had settled in the Bronx. The Mosholu Parkway was great fun in those early days. Marty's Donut Shop on Jerome Avenue was a graffiti headquarters. And back in 1970, I managed to find my way there. The store was divided into two parts with a jukebox in the back. There were tables and a long counter surrounded by spinning stools and with red leather seats with silver stripes. I spun on these stools for many years. In front of the store, there was a pizza section, and next to that were all the latest pinball machines. And then there was the famous Marty's Donut Shop bathroom, where every graffiti writer left his mark. They burnt their names on the ceiling with cigarettes and matches. They tagged their names on the bathroom walls with razors. So, of course, here, left to right, Fuzz, Roy the conductor, and a supervisor from the train authority. So these guys were all like hanging out with the kids, even though they were writing graffiti. Everybody seemed to kind of get along. And of course, Fuzz talks about how in the early days, um, there wasn't this war between the cops and the graffiti writers. So it's kind of reflected in this picture right here. And then Fuzz admires an early Maiko piece, and I guess Maiko was another graffiti writer from back in the day. So here's another picture taken from that time, and it looks a little disjointed because this was an overleaf. This was a two pages, and I kind of had to combine them in the when I scanned them, I could only scan them one at a time, and I had to combine them. But what 8-year-old kids are doing this now, right? I mean, and that's a serious question. I mean, I would not advocate my 8-year-old to go out and write graffiti in the New York City subway system. But there was a certain freedom to those times. And of course, the kids who grew up in those times were much more free range, much less supervised. And I believe personally that they were much more able to handle, well, the bullshit of the world that later came at them because they were so trained from early days to fend for themselves, to deal with issues on the outside, to be part of social circles rather than this online world, which is really very anti-human when you think about it. A fiend is born. And give me a second here. I'm sorry. I'm just going to take myself off screen for a second. I just have to clear my throat. I apologize. All right, I'm back. A fiend is born. And of course, this shows Fuzz a little older, all confident. And of course, this is a confidence that comes from, well, hanging out on the streets all day and having to fend for yourself and having bad things happen to you, good things happen to you, life happening to you. Okay. I seem to just fall right into it. Riding on a train in those days meant sending out a message to all who saw it. At least I thought so. I was 8 years old and I lived right next to the two biggest train yards in New York City. My fate was sealed. The Woodlawn Barnyard housed mostly the IRT number 4 trains. Also, but in a lesser numbers, the 1, the 2, the 3, the 5, and the 6 trains. And last but not least, in the very early days, the 7 trains. In those days, these trains were pretty much clean as a whistle. They were painted a bright cascade green. Little did I know then that in future years I would roam that line with an iron can. And then there was the Bedford Park Barnyard that housed the D line. How convenient for me. I could just walk over there and investigate. The Bedford Park Barnyard held almost every letter line that the Transit Authority had to offer. Some of the original inventors did their best work there. When the number 4 left the Bedford Park train station, it was just about to reach the most famous train station of all time, the Mashalou Parkway station. You could see the Woodlawn Barnyard perfectly. Rows of trains parked there like wooden soldiers, just waiting to be sprayed upon. Red was the attack color. The names were the message. My inner thoughts at that age 8 were, how old do you have to be to do this? Do you have to pay anybody? Or do you just roll in there and do your thing? How do you get to the trains? Was it dangerous? What motivated these guys? Were they doing it for other people or just themselves? Where do you get your name from? And what does that name mean? It's not nothing. It's got to mean something, or otherwise, why would these guys be doing it? Where did they get their paint from? In the beginning, so many things ran through my mind, but I was pretty sure of one thing. I knew this couldn't be legal. But I finally just thought, hey, I can do that. I figured I already had a head start because I was born in Indiana and raised near the woods. I trapped, I fished, I hunted. I could handle a lot for a little guy. So I began to patrol the subways, collecting everything in my path. I looked and observed all the markings, even the carvings done with a knife. In the train stations, people would scratch their names on train poles with a key. I collected spray tops, spray cans, magic markers, signs, maps, and rocks. I took a couple of rocks from every train yard that I went to. The elevated trains didn't have rocks, so I took the fire extinguishers, light bulbs, conductor sticks, and advertisement signs. I also had a couple of emergency brake handles. I housed my collection at headquarters, aka my room. I think I had more transit authority paraphernalia than the transit authority did. My cartoons would come on in the afternoon. Popeye the Sailor Man. I grew up with that guy. Courageous Cat and Minute Mouse, Spider Man, all the original old school writers from 1969 and 1970 took their names from cartoon characters. Thor 1, Spider 1, Captain America, Casper 1, Flame 1, Devil, Daredevil, Little Hawk 1 and 2, The Hawk, Heckle and Jekyll. Whoops. Sorry. I finally came to realize that the name was the really significant thing that made you who you were. My boy at the time, Greek 501, chose the name Hulk 62 because he was a large guy and it was a terrific name for him. Other writers chose names from other sources of inspiration that came through the trains. Comet 1, Out of the Sky, that was his destiny. Blade 1, like right out of a knife drawer or something. Me, I wanted my statement to be pow, right in your face, because that's what was graffiti to me. That's why the very first name I chose was Popeye One. All right, now this is for all you Son of Sam heads out there who want to hear stories of Satanism. Okay, so here we go. And the devil cults of the Bronx. Satan on the way to the foreyard. I would always be lurking in the shadows somewhere. I had to be to check out and see who was around. I used to roll down the street, stop and look around, and then take out my magic marker and get off a quick tag when no one was looking. After that, I'd just run off in the other direction. Then I'd go down the block and start writing my name again. They were just little messages to let people know that I was around. I would always make a quick dash over to the Marshallou Parkway train station to hit that up as well. One night I lied to my mom and I told her that I was going to sleep over my friend's house, but of course that never happened. It was now the winter of 1971 and I peeked out my doorway to see if there was anyone around on the street. There were a few people here and there, some were walking their dogs. There was a group of winos across the street sharing a bottle. There was a group of teenagers hanging out on the other benches. On a Saturday night in the Bronx in those days, the streets were alive and full of energy. Despite the cold weather, people were still out there. I wondered if I would be able to slip by everyone unnoticed, but I knew that was impossible. You see, every night when you go out to write graffiti, the night may start out one way, but often end another. As I opened the door of my building, a few people who were across the street turned around. They were neighborhood kids and not really into graph scene, but they did write occasionally. One of the guys wrote Hawk, another wrote Snuff, and another guy wrote Dwin. There was another guy who wrote Bobcat. One of the other benches was a friend of mine named Jojo. He used to write Tar. He was one of the baddest cats on the whole block. He was there talking to a new neighbor who had just moved into the building around the corner from me. The new guy's name was Billy. I was glad to see that the neighborhood was filling up. Most of these kids had a regular life, but they held it down a little when it came to graph. Me, I just took the whole thing much more seriously. Somehow I felt it was my job. As I got halfway down the block, most of them spotted me. These guys were generally a good group of fellas. In some ways, they even looked out for me. Usually we got along pretty well and had a couple of scuffles. My friend Tar spotted me immediately. He himself had moved into the area recently. I have to say that Tar 1 was one of the most adventurous dudes on the parkway. He said, "Where you going?" We met up with each other in the middle of the street. I replied, "Yo, I'm going to the foreyard, dude." I didn't even have to ask him if he wanted to come along. He simply said, bet, let's go." At this point in my life, Jojo was really my pal. His older sister Ellen was mad cool. She used to make us English muffins with butter and jelly and hot chocolates. He had a little sister too, named of Mary, and she was the cutest little girl on the whole block. Billy was down with our team also, and his sister Patricia too. It was a pleasure to have run into Jojo that night. "What are you working on tonight?" he asked me. "Before I go to the yard, there's this spot I've been scoping out for a while, and I want to stop there. There's some maniac hippie dudes hanging out in the basement of the old Marshallou Parkway train station bathroom." "What kind of dudes are you talking about?" "Yo, these dudes are devil worshippers, man." In those days, the Bronx and Yonkers had a lot of devil worshippers, lost souls, you might say, just singing incantations in the night. My boy Jojo always thought that I was kind of a strange dude. As we started to walk away, I asked him, Yo, aren't you going to say goodbye to your friends? He replied, Nah, they're bombed. Besides, they'll be here when I get back. I had found tags in an old abandoned bathroom at the other side of the Mashalou train station, way in the back. There were all kind of devil worship signs on the walls. Someone drew a red devil with horns coming out of the top of its head. There was a tag that said devil and another tag that said cult. There were satanic symbols all over the walls and old burnt up red candles lying on the floor. There was an old beat up brown blanket lying in the corner. Broken beer and wine bottles were lying all over the floor, and the walls were all a slimy green. Jojo didn't believe a word I had told him, so we cut down through the parkway and headed for the spot. With my little El Marco, I had written my name Fuzz One when I had been in there previously. I wanted to send them a message that it was not their secret spot anymore. And of course, here we see the very confident Fuzz One walking down the block here, a little older. There were a lot of old secret spots all over the place, come to think about it. I used to love to explore these secluded areas. I guess Tar had to see this for himself. We climbed over this little wall on the parkway and we proceeded up through the bushes to Jerome Avenue. Then we climbed over another wall. Later on, this place would become one of the spots that saved my life. Anyway, me and Tar started creeping the roll. I took him up to this little window, but I took a look first. Then I let Tar take a peek. There were about 5 dudes in there, and they looked like they had a chick with them. They all seemed crazed, no doubt tripping on acid, drinking, and smoking. The whole basement was lit up with candles. It was an eerie sight. They had these big red candles that were melting on top of the toilet seats. We couldn't see the tag I'd done because it was right underneath the window. I believe I was one of the first guys out of their realm, so to speak, to have discovered this spot. Jojo blanked out and backed up a little and stepped on a can or something. It made a noise, and one of the dudes looked up to the window and said, Hey, who the fuck is that? I told Jojo, Yo, come on, let's book, let's book. He was scared, and so was I. I thought, what if they came out of there and chased us? We would have been fucked. But who knew what these dudes were into? They might have wanted to use us for a sacrifice. We ran like hell, and I tried to lighten things up and asked Jojo jokingly, What are you going to get your mother for Christmas? As we jumped over the wall and ran across the street on Jerome Avenue, he replied, We just saw some devil worshippers, and you're asking me about Christmas presents? Me and Jojo always hung out for the holidays, and Christmas was right around the corner. It's funny, he always called me Popeye. He could never get used to calling me Fuzz One, but he was my boy, and he could have called me anything he liked. Things were getting busy down at the foreyard. There was major construction going on there. When we arrived, Jojo said to me, Yo, what are we going to do? The insides or the outsides? I replied, Both. So we walked right into the yard. Even though he was just a neighborhood guy, to me, Jojo was a real writer. He holded it down for the early 70s, and I was right there by his side to tear shit up. Fuzz One and Tar One. We were 2 of the first writers to tag on the columns of Tracy Towers. So this is a picture of Fuzz in 1977, portrait of the artist as a young man. And I love these photos. You just see what life was like back then, street life, big cars. It was real nice. And this is a great photo too because it shows of course the left's favorite word, diversity, right? We see the Hispanic kids, the black kids, the white kids, all hanging out, all different ages. All of these, I guess, were his graffiti writers, friends, maybe friends from the neighborhood. I'm not quite sure. But try finding a scene like this today, right? Even in New York City, you're just not going to find it. It's not possible. And of course, something is lost when you don't have kids hanging out like this. And of course, here's Fuzz One over here. So he was like a real b-boy from back in the day. I mean, this guy was for real. Herman the German. Neighborhood stalwart Herman the German mans his post on the benches along the Mashalou Parkway. And of course, New York City was fit. And look at that beautiful car in the background, right? Cadillac, I believe. Maybe an Oldsmobile. Herman the German with his cigarette, looking all angry. And, Fuzz probably snapped this picture without asking him, and the guy was like, "You little bastard." But, that was the Bronx back then. Racking with boots. Despite our fights, I was fortunate enough to have one of the greatest moms in the world. There were many times she made it possible for me to get away from the hurt that I saw on the New York City subways. She always gave me spending money to buy Heroes, pizzas, Three Musketeer bars, and Pepsis. I'd have money left over to pick up the latest issue of Vampirella magazine. But most importantly, she provided the key to my travels, money for car fare. Yes, my mom took care of me well. We'll get into the story, but here's his friend Boots 119. Be afraid, fools. Boots 119 flaunts his guns. So now we're going to get into a story with stealing with boots. So that's what racking means. I always have my car fare with me and my Three Musketeers money on the side. Sometimes I'd catch the number 20 bus to White Plains, which took me up to Gimbel's. Now, let me just clarify this once. Fuzz One was one of the first writers to rack up in the Cross County Shopping Center when it was like the country up there. There were two Martin's paint stores in the Gimbel's area. One day I decided to take the bus up there and get me some exotic colors. People don't realize that Martin's Paints was a part of New York City's history. On this particular day, I wasn't even planning to go up there, but the stronger part of me said, "Why don't you make it over there today?" And as usual, I listened to that voice. The Martin's store that I loved was the one that was all the way in the back next to the parking lot. You could go in there with a wheelbarrow and come off. In 1972, there were only two guys who worked in there. There was one in the front of the store and one in the back. The spray paint was situated on one side, wrapping all the way around the store to the back door. The guys that worked there must have been two of the first Hindus to come to the United States. The one who worked in the front of the store wore a green nylon button-up shirt and brown pants. The guy in the back had one of the first Saturday Night Fever DAs that I have ever seen. He was down with the movement even before Travolta got in the game. The dude's shirt was an old Delancey Street joint. Believe me, later on I rocked those shits for years, but this Hindu was sporting it in 1972. He had the short sleeve number with the zipper front with a black collar and white stripe trim going around the collar and the sleeves. It also had the cool cigarette pocket. The guy was a player in his own time. He had the AJ Lester belt loops going, the black and white checkered joints. But the real shit that killed me is that they both had the 4-inch Marlin blue marshmallow shoes with the little white laces going up the front. I used to walk in that store and I'd be on the ground in hysterics. These dudes were hardly even speaking English back then. When they saw you, they didn't say my friend. I don't think they knew how to phrase yet. Their greeting was crazy. Gabid, how may I help you? I would just walk right past these guys every day and say, "Oh, I'm all right. I already know what I want." In those old days, Martin's Paints used to make crazy money. They used to sell black lights, those little poles with the small lights on them in all different colors, spray paint, house fixtures, light bulbs, little carpets, and all kinds of things. So naturally, from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m., the store was really busy. It was one of the best paint stores around. On this particular day, I was standing in Martin's Paint right in front of the Federal Safety Green rack, and these three kids walked in. It was Boots 119, Victor 161, and Simon 007. These guys were a team. They just swung open the back door of Martin's Paints and walked right in with Boots 119 leading the way. Boots said, "It's Boots 119. I'm here, bro. Where's the paint?" The guy with the Delancey Street shirt took one look at Boots and knew he was in for trouble. By the time they made their way over to the paint rack, I had about 15 cans stashed in my back. Boots was kind of a crazy guy, and he said to me, "Yo, Junior, what are you doing here?" I answered, "Yo, we'll talk about that outside." Simon and Victor seemed amazed that I was standing right there. We all walked outside the store, and I said to them, "What's up with you guys yelling and screaming all over the place? You're going to get the joint hot." Boots said to me, "Do you write?" "Yeah, I write. I write Fuzz One. What's it to you?" "Holy shit, get out of here. You're not Fuzz One." "Yo, are we going to wrap this shit up or what?" Boots said to Simon and Victor. "Yo, I think this guy really is Fuzz One." Boots was like a machine. He just kept going and going. I said, "Are we going to get some paint?" I had noticed some empty boxes in the back of the store, and I told Simon and Victor, "Why don't you guys just get those boxes over there?" They didn't talk shit or anything, but just went and got the boxes and came right back over to me. They had the right idea from the jump. Victor goes, "Do you want us to do you want us to fill them up?" I said, "Yeah, go for it." Boots held the door for them, and Victor and Simon just walked in. They laid the boxes on the floor and just started grabbing 5 to 10 cans at a time. Federal Safety Green Rust-Oleums, Dunes Tans, oranges, light yellows, purples, chestnut browns, and forest greens. The guy with the Saturday Night Fever DA said, "Gabid, Gabid, what are you doing to my store? My store, thief, thief, stop or I'll call the police." I told the guy, "Shut the fuck up. This ain't your store." He replied, "I know you. I know you. You're the ringleader. I saw you fishing many times for goldfish by Woolworths." He did see me. For a quarter, I did go fishing for the goldfish. The guy was a rat. So I knew then that we could never come back to this store. It was burnt. Simon and Victor lifted up their boxes and walked right towards the door. The guy from the front of the store was a little bolder than the guy in the back. He was yelling, "Gabid, Gabid, where are you going from my store?" His English was a little bit choppier than the other dudes. Homeboy started running after us with a paint roller. He looked like he wanted to assault someone. We all started laughing as we ran right through the parking lot. Naturally, a few of the cans fell out of the boxes. Gabid picked up the cans and started throwing them at us. One of the cans broke some guy's car window. Once you got through the Martin's Paint parking lot, there was a whole bunch of woods. There were hardly any housing developments in the area at that time. After that experience with Boots 19, Victor 161, and Simon 007, we were boys for life. We all stood in the middle of the bushes, laughing and joking around as we emptied both of the boxes onto the ground. Victor and Simon had scored about 100 cans, and they were generous. We split the cans 4 ways. I could tell that Boots 119 liked me a lot, and he invited me over to his house for lunch. These dudes were a blast, and I knew I had finally clicked up with some people of a high caliber. We got along fine, and I think that's what I kind of brought something into their world, and they in turn brought something to mine. Even though Victor and Simon were real cool guys, it was Boots who I became very close with. We were like brothers in the beginning. On my first visit to his home, he treated me very well. He showed me where the bathroom was so that I could wash up. He asked me to have a seat in the kitchen while he made us some nice wedges, popped out some sodas and chips, and we just sat there and had our lunch. In those days, when I hung out with Boots, I really felt like I was somebody and a part of something. His dad and mom were two great people, and both of them, in many ways, always made sure that I was provided for with food, money, you name it. They treated me like I was their own. And of course, here's a picture of Fuzz and Boots. What does it say here? Vincent relaxes on the roof of the garage with Boots and his dog Puppy, RIP, circa 1972. And of course, Boots has a big thing of Jack Daniels or whiskey right here, right? They're like, I don't know, 13 years old, getting wasted, and, different life back then. So, of course, they were just talking about the famous Cross County Shopping Center, which was a Yonkers, and it's still is in Yonkers, but we're talking about the old Cross County Shopping Center. And these are pictures that I pulled offline that are vintage. You can tell, of course, by the cars that were there. And the Cross County Shopping Center was a great place. I mean, my father brought me there all the time. That's where I went to Herman's, Sporting Goods, went to Woolworths. We bought our parakeet at Woolworths and all of our parakeet supplies, everything. I mean, everything was there. There was a store called Dragon's Den. Although Dragon's Den came later, the the original Dragon's Den was on Central Avenue. And I remember in 1984, I got a drawing of Wolverine made by the guy who actually drew Wolverine for the X-Men. It was super cool. They would just hang out all day. You'd pay them $20 and he would draw you a Wolverine. And that's one of the few things that I still have from those days. And so the Cross County Shopping Center was, of course, very famous. Here's a picture of the parking lot. Here's the Woolworths, one of the Woolworths. The other one was over here, off the picture over here. And the general infrastructure of this place is still there. This building is still there, but it looks a lot different now. They've tried to make it a little bit more high class, but back then it was, just a place where a centralized location with a lot of stores. And this is, of course, the Gimbals that he was talking about, right? And it was a main store there, and all of these shops here. You had William Tell Hardware. Here's the Woolworths. This was the Woolworths where they had the little hot dog stand where you get the hot dog with the green relish. and the little soda cup that they would put in a metal container, and it was like a little cone. And of course, you could see how old these pictures are from the car here. And the Martin's paint that I remember was somewhere around here in this area right over here. So it came a little later, I believe. So back to Fuzz One, back to Fuzz One's book. And a big shout out to everyone watching here. Thanks for sticking with me. This is, of course, a picture of specific New York City, Bronx, Westchester, Yonkers history. But it seems like, a lot of you guys are into it. So I'm very happy to be bringing this to you. And sorry for not paying too much attention to the chat. I'm highly into what I'm doing here, so the chat's kind of going by. But I hope you guys are having a good time in the chat, reminiscing, enjoying yourself, listening to these stories. So of course, here's a picture that I was talking about. Fine all jive piece, circa 1972, and this is the dichotomy between, of course, the people drawing their names on the walls versus the true pioneers of the art form of graffiti, right? So you started to see in the early 70s these big pieces start to appear on the trains that would take up half cars, whole cars, and of course we're going to see many pictures of Fuzz One's work. And I gotta say, this guy is a fantastic artist. I really am very impressed with not only his writing but his photography, and of course, last but not least, his graffiti. But this is not his. This is a picture of a dude named All Jive. And of course, this is a great photograph showing what I think is Gun Hill Road, where it goes down the hill here in the Bronx. A familiar sight, a D3 tag emblazoned on a Bronx bus circa 1973. And of course, that's a beautiful looking piece right there. Even though some people just wrote their names, they tried to be as artistic as possible. And of course, those of us who grew up in the Bronx remember these buses that look just like this. I took these buses to high school every day. This style of bus, I remember this bus growing up very well. I'm wondering whether this is actually 1973 because this van looks like it's from 1977 or 78. But I could be wrong about that. And of course, Van Cortlandt Park. What would a show be about Fuzz One? And of course, what would a show be that I bring you here on this Son of Sam Truth channel without at least talking about Van Cortlandt Park once or twice, right? I see Scott Cardinals in the chat, so very, very good to see you, Scott. So here's, of course, the famous golf house at Van Cortlandt Park, and this is probably, I don't think Fuzz took this picture because this is clearly from the 60s. This car is from probably like 1966 or 67, and it actually says in the book that this was a Bronx Historical Society, a photograph from there. Now, it's weird. Are these solar panels? Like, what's going on with up here? Did they have solar panels back in those days? I don't know. But this edifice, this building still exists to this day, and you could go there. Well, if you're in town, you can go there any day of the week that you want. But this is the entrance to the area of Van Cortlandt Park that we're going to talk about, where all the chicken hawks were, the cruisers, all the gay dudes who hung out in the park, trolling for each other, the devil worshippers, and all sorts of stuff. And, just like Fuzz has had his experiences with those guys, so did I, of course, as a youth going into Van Cortlandt Park. I started going to Van Cortlandt when I was about 15 or 16, because as a kid from Riverdale, we didn't venture down the hill very often, and we certainly didn't go to Van Cortlandt Park because it had a reputation. But once I hit about 15, 16, and I started to widen my range a little bit, Van Cortlandt Park and the woods of Van Cortlandt Park were a place that I know like the back of my hand now, of course, from having been in there so much as a kid. And of course, as a kid, I would often see the gay dudes in the park. We'd even be solicited by them, right? But you knew to run away. I mean, it never got really dangerous. You would always see dudes wearing like long coats, They were always it was they were kind of freaky, and a couple times I accidentally stumbled upon some dudes getting it on in the woods. That was something that I definitely would like to etch out of my brain, but can't because it was seared in there. Um, but yeah, Van Cortlandt Park was a hardcore place. I'm not sure what's going on in there nowadays, but back then it was a cesspool of degenerates. So let's get into it. The 666 mission. Back in the Bronx in the early 70s, there were a lot of strange things happening. One day from riding home on the bus, I bumped into a kid that I knew from school. He hung around Van Cortlandt Park a lot, and he told me about a guy that was going around chopping kids' dicks off. At first, I couldn't believe it. For a kid, I thought I'd heard just about everything. Graffiti was in its second year, and I was 10 years old now and already making power moves. But this bit of information took the cake. Van Cortlandt Park at that time was a cesspool full of weirdos. The chicken hawks were running rampant. They usually wore a beige trench coat and often baseball caps. The perpetrator was usually a white male from the ages of 28 to 35, and more than likely still lived with his mother. When I arrived back in my neighborhood, I went to my house and had a can of meatballs and spaghetti. I sat there thinking about what my friend had told me. On this particular day, I had plans to go bombing the number one line, so I went to my closet and got myself a few cans. I had my usual Pilot, some supermarket ink, a couple of Scotch Guard fat caps. I cleaned myself up and headed out. When I got to the corner where Marty's donut shop was, I saw this bugged out dude named Rob. I whistled to him from across the street. Everything that guy was into was bad news, but he also knew about a lot of shit that was going on. I would see him all over the place, and he always tried to scare me just for the fun of it. He didn't know me as Fuzz. He knew me by the name Popeye. I approached him and convinced him to get me a bottle of Regnier's brandy. It was the triangular bottle with 3 different red stripes on it. The cap to the bottle was a shot glass. Rob actually wasn't too bad a guy, but he was definitely mixed up. I used to see him in the park sometimes having whole conversations with himself. Still, the one thing that he was good at was shoplifting. He could have wiped out the whole store out, but instead he just racked up 1 bottle of brandy for me. The bottle originally cost $4.99. He got it for free, so I gave him $3. He asked me where I was going, and I told him, "Yo, I'm going to do some tags." "Tags? What's that?" "Graffiti. I'm going to go write my name." It seemed like in the old days, all the dudes in the Bronx asked a lot of questions. "Where at?" I didn't want to tell him exactly where I was going, so I just said, "Around the Van Cortlandt Park area." "Van Cortlandt Park? You shouldn't go down there." "Why not?" "They have a whole bunch of devil worshippers back in those woods." "What are you talking about?" He just said, "Besides that, the Dick Chopper patrols that area." Funny you should mention that, because earlier today, someone I know told me the same thing. As I looked at Rob, I thought that he kind of fit the bill of the Dick Chopper. He had dirty blonde hair and brown eyes. He also wore a beard and had a mustache. He was another one of those guys who sported those fucking high waters. He always wore white socks with these black shoes that looked like cop shoes and a beige coat like the old Quarterfields joints. My plan was to go to 207th Street layup on the number one line, and good old Rob wanted to go along for the ride. At first, I thought he was bullshitting since I had pegged him as a nut job, but I thought, what the hell? If this guy wants to go riding with me, why not? Besides, he said in return he'd show me where the devil worshippers hung out. I thought to myself, it's funny how many people worship the devil, just flipping the script and howling at the moon. Anyway, Rob and I were off on our journey. We took a shortcut and went straight through a path down at the park on the other side of the golf course. When we got to the boathouse in Van Cortlandt Park, we started looking around. I really had no intention of getting in a boat with this guy, but he assured me that everything would be cool. Someone else wouldn't have even ventured across the street with this dude, but somehow here I was. He said, "Popeye, wait for me." He went in the water and climbed around the end of the fence and untied his little pedal boat. The dude was definitely bugging. When I saw the front of the pedal boat start to come around the side of the fence, Rob was in it. I told him, "Yo, you got to be nuts if you think I'm getting in that thing." Now, later on in years, I was to become the king of the pedal boats, and I even wrote graffiti on them. But this was my first time out. Yo, dude, I'm going to cut out. I got to get to those trains." "Come on, Popeye, don't be a blowhead." "Yo, we could get murdered out there." He pedaled closer to where I was standing. I told him, "Dude, isn't this where you said the Dick Chopper hangs out?" Just let the dick chopper come out after us. And with that, he went inside his coat and pulled out a gun. I couldn't believe it. Holy shit, I asked him. Where'd you get that thing? I'll let you hold it when we get close to the devil worshiper spot. I figured, fuck it, this guy's got a gun. If we do run into those maniacs, we can just blast shit up. I'd been around guns my whole life, so it didn't scare me. I jumped into the boat. At first, I didn't know what to do. Rob was pedaling forwards, and I was pedaling backwards. We were just going around in circles, but I finally got the hang of it. After that, we just took off. As we headed towards the back of Van Cortlandt Lake, there were all sorts of offenders on the shoreline by the bushes. They were drinking beer and smoking. There were a few other people in boats as well. Rob and I pedaled the boat all the way to the back of the lake. Once you went underneath this little bridge, you were past the safety zone, so to speak. I noticed some dudes hanging out on top of the bridge. They looked really kind of shady to me, but they didn't seem to bother Rob none. I almost felt like I wanted to bail out of the boat, but instead I said to Rob, "Yo, now is a good time to let me hold that gun. Did you ever shoot a gun before?" "Man, my dad brought me a shotgun for my 7th birthday. Besides, my dad had lots of guns. I've shot pistols, a German Luger, a Derringer, shotguns, and 30-30s. With that said, he just handed the gun over. When I finally saw it up close, the shit was only a 22, but it was a nickel plated and had a pearl handle. It was a dynamite looking pistol. But to really take someone down with it, you'd have to shoot them smack in the forehead. It seemed like we were getting further and further away from Van Cortlandt Park. Back then, there was a lake that went all the way up to White Plains. Rob just steered the boat into that lake. I remember saying, "Yo, don't tell me we're going down there." Luckily, in a way, there was a full moon that night. When you are in the woods on a full moon night, the whole place is lit up. At least you can see what you're doing. And so we ventured on. As the boat went down through the lake, the water got more shallow. In the shallow parts, there were big boulders that were banging underneath the boat. At one point, the water got rough, and then the boat started banging from side to side. I was planning to save my brandy for the train yards, but I cracked it open at that point. I filled up the cap with a big shot. Immediately, Rob said, "Can I get some of that?" I thought to myself, this guy is fucked up enough when he's straight, but I passed him the bottle anyway. He took a big slug for himself. I put the cap back on and stuck the bottle back down in between the seats. We were now pedaling rapidly, and all of a sudden we came to this clearing. The water at that point broke up into two different sections. "I think it's this way," he said. And so we kept going for about 2 or 3 more miles. From afar, I saw this great big castle in the woods. I said, "Holy shit." And for a quick minute, it didn't seem like Rob was so bugged out after all. I only hope that I can trust him. He said, "Aha, see, didn't I tell you?" Then he told me that we were going to stash the boat right there and we'd walk the rest of the way. All right, that sounds cool. We started creeping through the bushes, walking along this long mini bike trail. We got to about 50 yards away from the castle. I couldn't really believe this place existed. It looked like an old stone monument. Behind it was a big glowing light. I couldn't see any people around, but I heard muffled voices. I said to Rob, "Yo, dude, if I shoot anyone here, you won't tell the cops on me, will you?" He replied, "Don't worry about it. I'm not going to tell a soul." It was amazing, but in the front of the joint, they had the ground landscaped. They were growing tomatoes, lettuce, pot plants, and all sorts of other things. We heard voices coming from the back of the place. I do have to say that Rob was a brave dude. Or was he leading me to his friends and I was to be part of the sacrifice? I quickly brushed that thought from my mind and just hoped for the best. We walked up the driveway to the front door. It appeared that maybe the city had tried to board this place up, but these ghouls got in there anyway. As we got right up to the front door, I saw a severed goat's head bleeding right there on the stairs. It looked fresh to me, and I said to Rob, "Let's get the fuck out of here." He replied, "Come on, I want to show you something." These people were devil worshippers, all right. They had the whole place done up. There were candles lit up all around, and ram's heads were drawn on the wall, along with 2 or 3 big red satanic stars. There were all kinds of satanic graffiti. I noticed a few dead animals lying around. There was a chicken on the table, bleeding with its head all fucked up. I also saw what I thought was a dead dog. We went up the stairs to the second floor, and all the lights were out. It seemed mighty strange that there was no one inside. Rob said, "Come on, follow me." We walked to the back of the castle, and when I looked out the back window, there was a big cross in the middle of the ground burning. There were about 8 or 10 crazed dudes going around in circles around the cross. I noticed a couple of girls sitting together by the fire. They appeared to be drinking beers. I said to Rob, "Yo, dude, I've seen enough. I believe you. Now let's get the fuck out of here." As we walked a little bit away from the window and got down to the first landing, some guy came out of nowhere. He said, "What the fuck are you guys doing here?" Rob and I jetted down the stairs, and there was no way that the dude could get out of our way, so Rob just knocked him right over. We ran like hell while the guy got up quickly and started yelling, "Come back here!" We got outside and headed for the bushes, but we couldn't find the boat. It seemed like we had run too far away from the castle, and now from where we were, we couldn't even see it. I thought, now we're really fucked. I saw about a half dozen lights coming through the bushes. I panicked, and even though I had the gun, I was petrified. I knew that if these dudes caught up with us, we'd be through. My spray cans and my brandy were in the boat, and as scared as I was, I didn't want to leave without them. 6 of the guys were carrying torches, big ones, with fire flaming at the ends. We were in deep shit now. I told Rob, "Come on, let's go back. We gotta find the boat. Maybe it's over there." Actually, we had passed right by it, but in our haste to get away. Finally, after scurrying around a bit, we found it. We jumped into the boat and crept down real low. The water was real shallow there. The dudes were looking all over for us. The only thing they didn't know was that we had come by boat. That was in our favor. While we were slowly drifting down the stream, they ran right by us with their flashlights and torches. One guy yelled out, "They must have went this way." Now that I got a better look at these guys, I realized that they were no teenagers. They were men holding it down, no doubt, for the 666 mission. I told Rob, "Yo, if I ever get out of here, I'll never be back this way again. These dudes are really out of their minds." I thought the guys on the rail seemed mild in comparison. At this point, though, we were doing pretty good in the water. We pedaled for another 2 miles or so and then came to this big opening. We came to another bridge, and I told Rob, "Yo, we should get the fuck out right here." And so we got out of the boat and just let it drift downstream. We climbed up this hill and were right underneath the highway. I asked, "How the fuck do we get back?" But trusty old Rob knew the way. We walked for about 10 blocks and then came to a street with a whole bunch of stores on it. There was a deli right in the middle of the block. We went in and got some beers and cigarettes. There was a bus stop right across the street, and the bus took us back towards the Van Cortlandt pool. When we got on the bus, the bus driver gave us a weird look. We were a sight, all right, all dirty and messed up. My sneakers and his shoes were all soaked with mud. I was ready to call it a night, but Rob wanted to go tagging. The bus let us off pretty much near where we wanted to go. Instead of getting on the train at 207th Street, we had to get on the train at 215th Street station. As we paid our fare, my bag exploded. All the fucking cans that I had carried the whole night long just split right out of the broken bag underneath the turnstile. So we picked up all the cans and dug into the garbage to find another bag to carry my stuff in. We emptied it out and put my cans in. They didn't all fit, so we searched until we found another bag. The whole time that we were doing this, the token clerk was watching us. I didn't know if he was going to call the cops or what, but we proceeded on our way. The number one layup in those days was primo. The stations were all wooden. Most of the platforms were also made of wood. Everything was painted green. In the middle of the train station, they had this big round swinging exit gate where you could go right down onto the street. We climbed down at the end of the platform and climbed right into the train. The one line had all mixed match cars. There were red cars, silvers, and the old black cars as well. Rob and I finished off the bottle of brandy. We talked about the devil worshippers that we had come across and of our experience that night. We walked all through the cars to 207th Street tagging our names. Rob really seemed to be enjoying himself. We then got out at 207th Street and walked all the way back home to the Mashalou Parkway. So here's the Van Cortlandt Lake, a place that you guys have seen, of course, in my video series. But this is an old vintage picture taken of it back in the old days. So the boathouse is right here, that boathouse that we saw earlier. Let me see if I can blow that up a little bit. Right there. And this was a train line. Hold on. This was called the Putnam Trail. And in these woods from about the late 1800s to about 1970 or so, maybe the 60s, there was actually a train line that went all the way up through these woods, all the way to Putnam County, which is about, 50 miles away. And it was in these woods right here that where all the chicken hawks were, all the molesters, all the gay dudes, all the cruisers, all the drug addicts. So this was the area that he was talking about. the Van Cortlandt Lake. All right, excellent. Let's carry on. Here's the famous 4 train yard by Bedford Park Boulevard. Great photograph. Here's some pictures of Fuzz's work. He also went by the name Vin, and you can see this guy was very adept artistically. He was excellent. He knew how to he had excellent perspective. He had amazing color skills, mixing colors. He every one of his paint of his art pieces. This is a huge Fuzz One blockbuster. He did this in 1974, right? It takes skill to do this because these trains, when you're painting on them, they're like up there, and you have to know perspective, and you have to be able to get all these proportions right. Otherwise, it's not going to look good. And guess what? You only have one chance. So amazing work. Here's another one of that Vin pieces right here. And again, a great photograph, circa 1974, Fuzz One, Vin. Look at the colors he used, the 3D effects, the art within the art with the stars and the bubbles. Okay. And also, like I said earlier, excellently framed photograph. You have the moon in there, right? Hey, I see Crime Spot's in there. What's up, Crime Spot? Great to see you. And of course, thanks to everybody who's joined. We have 54 people watching, which is great. I hope you're all enjoying yourselves on this. Well, if you're in anywhere in the United States, for the most part, you're in a very frigid environment right now, not enjoying yourself. I'm wearing 2 pairs of socks. I'm wearing 2 layers of shirts. I'm wearing thermal pants right now, and I'm in my apartment, and the heat is on. But it's just extremely cold out. So here's some more pictures, again showing Fuzz's work. He was also he went by Ivory, which I guess was a play to him being white. And of course, you could see Fuzz One within the ivory. And this is a very famous photograph of him in front of an ivory piece. And he's wearing the same shirt, and probably, I don't know if it's the same day as the picture on the front of the cover. Let me just, so I don't have to scroll back, I'll just show it, again. Same shirt, same, looks like it could be the same day. So obviously they went out that day to take photos, and this is another. I mean, look how beautiful this piece is. This kid was like 11 or 12 years old. So now we're going to be introduced to the character of Dondi. And Dondi was a very famous graffiti artist. And if we're not going to read this whole thing because it's just going to be too take way too much time. But Dondi was a very, very famous graffiti artist, and he also used the tags Nako. So he was a member of the TOP crew, the Odd Partners. He formed his own crew, the CIA, Crazy Inside Artists. Dondi pioneered many of the styles and techniques still used by modern artists. And his most famous work was Children of the Grave, parts 1, 2, and 3. So the picture that I showed earlier in this thing where I said both were Blade, one of those might be a Dondi. I might have been mistaken on that. But what's interesting about this, of course, is this guy was a mixed race. He was black and Italian. He was calling his pieces Children of the Grave, which was named after a Black Sabbath song. So you can see the ferment, the artistic ferment, the cross-cultural inspiration that was going on in New York City in those days. We weren't all in our little camps, right? I only listen to this. I only listen to that. Art and music was influencing everybody in different ways. And of course, he died of AIDS on October 2nd, 1998. So just a person that you might want to look up if you're interested in this for further study. But here's a piece by Dondi. Here's one of the Children of the Grave pieces, 1, 2, and 3. So this is true art. I mean, this is beautiful stuff. Again, wonderful use of color, perspective, 3D, right? Beautiful. Taking up a whole train car. And of course, none of these guys got paid for this. They were literally breaking the law doing this. And here's a piece from that Fuzz One took, a picture that Fuzz One took on a Van Sicklin rooftop piece circa 1978. And you can see that even on the smaller areas, that beautiful style, the 3D, right? Look like something out of a comic book. Very beautiful stuff. The colors are amazing. The way that the colors are splashed on here, just absolutely beautiful stuff. And of course, Dondi plays a huge role in Fuzz One's book because, well, here they are all hanging out. And we're not going to read the entire story, and we're not going to read the story. I'm just going to show you the pictures, but the story is like 8 pages long. It's really, really good. Fuzz One becomes friends with Dondi's mother, hanging out with him. Dondi White relaxes in Miller Park in Brooklyn with Flex, aka Hotshot, in 1976, drinking Schaefer beer, right? And of course, I recognize that can anywhere because that's what my grandfather drank in Puerto Rico. Fuzz and Dondi put on their game faces for the camera. So probably smoking a joint here too, drinking, probably cutting school. So, look at these beautiful old cars. I mean, this is true New York City cultural history right here. So Fuzz hung out with all the greats. He was one of the greats himself, and he hung out with all the greats as well. So he's a total wealth of knowledge and information, a truly historical figure. And here is a picture that Fuzz must have taken. Knee 3, Flex, Dondi, and his girlfriend Beverly on the roof of the White's house. That was Dondi's last name, at 412 Van Sicklin Avenue in Brooklyn. So again, even though it's a little out of focus, it's still a well-framed shot. Beautiful, like great, perfect amount of headroom, good foreground, really nice stuff. All right, well, now we're going to be introduced to the Crazy Five. And the Crazy Five were one of the most famous graffiti crews of all time. And Fuzz knew them all. We're gonna read a story of the Crazy Five. And Blade, the Crazy Five consisted of Cratchy, Tull, Blade, Vam, and Death in 1975. So they were all became pretty famous, but Blade became the most famous. And if you look up Blade on Google, there's a ton of stuff on him, YouTube videos where he's walking around and talking with another famous graffiti artist named Comet. It looks like the video was taken in the 90s, but Comet plays a role in Fuzz One's book as well. Another early white pioneer of graffiti. So again, this was a time when the whites hung out with the blacks. There wasn't any of this weird racial tension going on amongst this subculture. I mean, you could just see that from this photograph, right? And everyone looked like this back in the day. I remember, well, I was only 2 years old in 1975, but I started becoming conscious in about 77, and people still look like this. So this is a real throwback, of course, to the way that kids looked. These look like men to us today, right? But these were kids. These were teenagers. And of course, the famous New York City parks where they would have the pool, right? Here it was like a makeshift pool with a fountain. Try having that happen today, right? Not going to happen because of all the crazy crazy COVIDian cultists out there, and we gotta protect our children and all this. Look at that, right? So I don't know what park this was. I have no idea, but this is a story about the Crazy Five. I used to hang out in so many different places with my trusty little camera. In the beginning, we all had our cameras with us, taking pictures of our latest work. There were so many writers that I admired and looked up to. Then there were some writers that just rubbed me the wrong way. But you can't get along with everyone, as I well knew. This is a tale of how I met the Crazy Five, a crew that I definitely had my ups and downs with. One day, I was riding up my usual 20 bus to White Plains. I was on my way to my film rack, which was the A&P in the Cross County Shopping Center. Boy, how I love that store. And 126 film was my goal. The best thing about the 126 film was that they would develop it for free. There was an envelope stapled to the back of it for you to use. Imagine all that film, all developed free. It was almost too good to be true. But then, of course, you needed the flash bulbs to go with it. I mean, God forbid it started to get dark and one of your masterpieces pulled into the train station. You didn't have one of your trusty flash bulbs. A 126 camera was a pioneer's tool to show his treasured works. The first graph pictures that were ever taken were Polaroids with the white borders. Then there were 126 cameras with the white borders. Then there were the 126 pictures with the rounded corners. To me, those were the best photographs ever taken of graffiti. Eventually, the 110 camera came into play, and 110 film also had the envelope on the back for free development. In my day, I used to have a 126 camera and a 110 camera. I used the 126 for the smaller shots and the 110 camera for the larger ones. Anyway, there I was, standing in the middle of A&P up in Yonkers. Sometimes, if you were lucky, you'd get about 10 packs of film in one shot. Whoops. I always used to think big. While I was standing there filling up my coat with flash bulbs and film, I saw this tall hippie white boy, kind of on the slender tip, standing there staring at me. Now, the only thing bad about racking film was that it was kept in front of the register. So I used to make believe that I was checking out the TV guides. Then I would wait for the cashier to start packing up some groceries and whip whop, I'd put 4 packs of film in each sleeve. Then I'd put 5 packs of flash bulbs under my arms and then head over to the cigarette area for a carton of Cools for good measure. After I took a look around to make sure that the coast was clear, I made a beeline right for the door. As soon as I got outside the parking lot, the same guy that was eyeballing me in the store was now there. He came over to me and he said, "Hey, yo, what's up? Do you write? Who are you?" "My name is Mike." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mike. My name's Vinny. What's up?" "I noticed you stealing some of that film over there." "I didn't steal any film." "You don't have to worry about me. I'm not a cop. Look, buddy, I got to get going." Now that I had my film, I had to get some paint to go with it. Right across the street from the A&P was a paint store. So I walked through the parking lot and Mike started following me. As I got to the paint store, I realized that I couldn't go in yet as I had my whole jacket filled with film. So not to try to get rid of Mike or anything, I just said to him, "I'll see you later, Mike." "Where are you going?" "Where am I going? I'm late. I'm supposed to meet someone." But then I added that I'd be back. Underneath the Cross County Shopping Center, there were all these tunnels and driveways. There were some stairs that went down into the tunnels. On previous excursions, I had found all these cool spots where you could hide things. I took my film and stuff out of my sleeves and coat and dropped all of it into a garbage can. Now I was ready to make a move again. Believe it or not, sometimes I lived dangerously. Once in a while, when I couldn't find a hiding spot, I would go into one store and rack up some stuff, and then with that stuff still on me, I'd go into another store and rack up some more. As I walked up the steps, there was a Woolworths right there. I figured, let me hit the Woolworths first before I hit the paint store. I walked into Woolworths and headed straight for the photo album section. Woolworths had the baddest photo albums for the graffiti writers. There were these big burgundy faux leather albums with gold lettering on the front that said album. When you opened it up, it was about 1.5 feet long, perfect for long train shots. All the major writers from back in the days had these albums. They were like the Bibles of graffiti. As I walked over to the album section, Mike was standing there again. I said to him, "Bro, I hope you're not following me." "I'm not following you." Then all of a sudden, he grabbed himself an album and about 20 packs of plastic fillers, the ones you used to put the photos in. Right then, he blew his cover. I said to him, "My man, let's cut to the chase. Do you write graffiti?" "Yeah, I write Vam." "Really? You're Vam? I see that name all over the place." "What do you write?" "Yo, I write Fuzz One." You should have seen the look on his face as we stood there in the middle of Woolworths. He said, "I heard that Fuzz One was a little munchkin dude. How long are you going to go stand there with that photo album in your back?" "Yeah, right. Let's get out of here." When we got outside, Vam asked, "What are you doing out here?" "The same thing you're doing. Shoplifting, dude." "What did you do with all that film you got?" "Don't worry about it. It's in a safe place." "Yo, I got to go somewhere and stash this album." "Okay, you go do that." I just went down my trusty stairs into the tunnel and threw my album in the garbage can. I always said a prayer that no one would come along and collect the garbage. Still, those were the chances you had to take. At that point, I was standing in front of Sam Goody, and there was a vending machine outside. If you put 50 cents in the machine, you got a macaroni and cheese dinner in a little can. I upped the 2 quarters, and it was nice and hot. Who comes walking up to me but Vam? He came over and said to me, "Did you get anything?" "Yo, dude, it's 12 o'clock. I'm on my lunch break." Vam always thought I was a crazy little dude. I said, yo, let's get back to Woolworth's. I got to get me one of those hot dogs in the little paper tray. I want one with a lot of mustard and some of that green relish. I used to love the fountain cokes that you got in there, served in the paper cup that they stuck into the little round metal container. Those were the days, and to me, that was really living. After that, I said to Vam, yo, lunch break is over. What do you want to hit next? Did you do Martin's yet? No, not yet. Why don't we go in there together and see what we can get? The guy from Martin looked us over and said kind of dryly, can I help you? I said, nah, we're all right. Vam could rack spray paint real well. He was a white dude and he knew his stuff. He had no problem going into the store and holding it down. We went into the front door of Martin's and exited out the back. Periodically, throughout the day, we went to about 15 or 20 stores. My one garbage can down in the tunnel turned into 3, each one full of stuff. Vam and I said our farewells and sat down on this old wooden bench in front of Gimbel's. I had all my supplies in some shopping bags. Everything that you could think of as far as graffiti supplies are concerned. I had film, paint, markers, ink, flashbulbs, fat caps, tube socks, gloves, and even underwear, incense, 8-track tapes, records, light bulbs, and cigarettes. I was good to go. There were other people who came and wanted to sit down on the bench, but there was no room. I waited somewhat impatiently for that bus to come and take me home. Naturally, I was nervous with all that stuff I was carrying. Then, when I finally got home, I had to pass by all the wolves who hung out at the rail. When they used to see me, they would go, jackpot. Some guys used to go, hey, Popeye, did you hit the mother load? And other guys used to say, yo, Fuzz, did the shipment come in yet? By the time I reached my building, I had given out treats all the way up and down the block. Markers, paint, films, and I even gave the old dudes some gloves to keep their hands warm. I always gave out crazy treats if I had made a big score. It made me feel like Santa Claus. On the 4 line, after you had met a graffiti writer in person, it always seemed like you would see his name more often. Now, in the very beginning, the 2 trains and the 5 trains and the 4 trains were always switching with each other. Vam came from White Plains Road, and so he was hitting a lot of 2s and 5s. And he was also bombing a lot of 4 trains. When Vam came to the subway, he came armed. He had about 30 cans of spray paint or better. Then he just started popping up all over the place. He even started coming to the 4 yard. One time, me, King 2, and Vam did a 3-man whole car in the number 4 yard. Vam did a mic piece with a spray can, man shooting out of his name. King 2 did a burner, and I did a Fuzz One piece. It was a flat black piece with a cascade green outline with drips. Vam had many friends, and he was a king to many, but his real partners in graffiti were Death, who also wrote Rocks, and Cratchy, and then Tull 13, who also wrote Mario, and then there was the Blade. These guys were the heroes, the Crazy 5. Back in those days, on any given afternoon, you could usually find the Crazy 5 hanging out at the McDonald's on Allerton Avenue. They would sit around and eat cheeseburgers and drink sodas and look at pictures in the seats at the back. In the early years, Vam and I became pretty tight. Death was a real cool guy, too. Cratchy was all right, but we didn't get along too well. Tull 13 was a great guy, and then, of course, there was Blade, who was always my boy. They incorporated into their crew another writer, Ajax 1. His girlfriend used to write graffiti, too, using the name Z73. This girl was one of the top female writers, and then finally they added another important guy to their group, Comet 1. Now, instead of the Crazy 5, there were 7 of them. Throughout the years, they incorporated so many other writers, but they still remain the Crazy 5. One time I came walking out of the Gun Hill Lumber Company up in the Bronx, and Comet and Blade were walking out of there also. I said, hey guys, what's up? Comet and Blade were the best of friends. What a pair. One of the best salt and pepper teams to ever hit the New York City train stations. During the mid-afternoon, you could always find the Crazy 5 playing basketball at Parkside Park, and I have to admit, they were some really good basketball players, but it was their nighttime work that I loved the most. These guys could climb the L poles of the trains better than just about anyone else. Then, still another guy joined their group, Saber 115. Shit, back in the days when Blade first started, he was bombing mail trucks. When he first started writing graffiti, he wrote on buses. Vam and I used to get along pretty well. I'd ring his bell and wait downstairs for him on the benches of 2975 White Plains Road. One night, though, I made the mistake of going with him to hide his paint in some abandoned lot. He'd always dig a hole the night before and hide his paint for when he went bombing. But when he went back to get that paint, it was gone. Afterwards, he always held that against me, even though I was totally innocent. A racker of my skill level didn't need to steal his stash. One night, me, Vam, and Blade went bombing at the Gun Hill Road layup. It was the winter of 1974, and the year would soon be at its close. I had forgotten to wear my boots that day, and my feet were frozen. Besides that, the train tracks had ice on them. Vam cracked out a whole car that said, "Michael loves puppy." The puppy was his girlfriend at the time. Then Blade did his famous Blade and Karen whole car. Believe me, just to be with them there that night was an exciting experience for me. These guys worked with skillful tactics. When it came to graffiti, the Crazy Five were bombing IRT trains. It was so cold that night, I spent most of my time in the conductor's booth. We had gone to the layup at about midnight, and these guys were still going strong at 8 in the morning. Vam and Blade, they just kept going. When it was all said and done, we walked off the layup, and I got out right there at the Gun Hill Road train station. I said my goodbyes to Vam and Blade. As I walked over the Gun Hill Bridge, the sun was shining bright on my face, and I could tell it was going to be another great day in my life as a graffiti writer. So, of course, here is the Crazy Five make their displeasure known. So, on the ivory piece, this must have been because they thought that Fuzz One stole the paint, so they wrote over his piece, which is a big no-no. It's what you want to do when you want to start a fight in the graffiti world. Okay, and the Crazy Five here. That's a bigger picture. Make their displeasure known. And so, of course, we see a smattering of photographs of the Fuzz One, Lucky Lord. He was also known as Lord 138. And you can see the free-range childhood. Here's a Lord Mom piece from 75. He called himself Lord sometimes. He wrote Mom sometimes. Fuzz often offered tribute to his dear mother. Here's one of those Vin pieces, Fuzz in one of his Vin pieces, this one on a wall circa 77. And again, you can clearly see the artistic talent this kid had. Beautiful 3D work, excellent color work, perfect proportions. Kingpin nostalgia. Just standing there in between those trains, that's what it was all about. Smelling that glorious Cascade green Rust-Oleum while you sprayed that mist of paint across the steel, and all the little particles of paint just seeped into the train. It was wonderful. The whole car was full of it. The smoke from the paint used to rise above the train out into the midnight sky. On a good night, I would stand there and look at all my paint lined up like soldiers. Taking in the paint-misted air, I'd be flying high as I cracked that chestnut brown Rust-Oleum for the outline. Then I'd get out the old school bus yellow for the 3 dimensions. For me, every night would be a different story. I'd always wonder who would be the first person to see my latest artwork. I'd envision my masterpieces rolling through the stations. How I loved how the sun reflected off my pieces. Bang, you couldn't miss them. The pieces would be gleaming off the train. But then as time went on, the piece that once shines so bright from the Bronx to Brooklyn would start to fade. If other writers liked your piece, it might last for 2 or 3 years, maybe even longer. But if not, there would be lines through it, maybe Hot 110 tags on it. People would even write messages to the writer in question. "You suck. You're dead." Or, "Toy, give it up." If you had a piece and it was all crossed out, it either meant you had crazy enemies or you were a toy. And it sucks to be a toy. I like toys, and I used to bring them out and show them how to rock trains hard. I'd show them how to live like kingpins in the night. So speaking of kingpins, here we have the famous Fuzz One. Fuzz One in the winter of 77. A few months after this photograph was taken, him and his mother left the Bronx and moved to Queens. And of course, here he is getting a little older, rocking the shell toe Nikes. Well, they weren't shell toe, but you know, this dude was doing stuff that back in that I was doing in the 80s, thinking it was original. And he was doing it in the late 70s, mid to late 70s, with the laceless sneakers. Check out that beautiful set of 1970s pants and the John Travolta DA. I mean, this guy's got some style. Here's a famous piece of his, Lord 138. And again, look at the handiwork. Look how beautiful. That took advanced planning. Beautiful work. Here's one of his from 1979, and you can see how advanced he got. He was writing the name Slurp in those years. And this is a one train, 242nd Street to South Ferry. Here we have some pictures. 1973. I don't know what he was doing, falling or maybe doing a karate kick. Playboy, right? Famous New York City intercoms back then. That brings back some memories. 1975. Graffiti all over his room. 1978. Doing a Fuzz One tag. This is one of the great photos of all time. 16 years old with his Lucky Rabbit's feet, his keds, and that he's got a bottle of liquor in his pocket right here, rabbit's foot. Just that look, it says it all. 1977. Here's some more from the late 70s. 77. Loves Frances. I'm not sure who, I guess Frances was one of his girlfriends. Fuzz One loves someone. Fuzz One loves, not quite sure who that says. And here he is on the subway, 1977. Now we're getting a little older here, 1979. We could see the famous Lincoln Town cars, and of course the Blarney Stone. Anybody who lives in New York City who grew up in the 70s and 80s and probably earlier, but certainly by the 90s, these were starting to disappear. The Blarney Stones were the greatest. They were Irish bars, but they always had a grill. And they served the best corned beef and mashed and potatoes that you can imagine, and cabbage. And I remember I would visit my father. He worked on 54th Street and 6th Avenue, and they had a Blarney Stone on 8th Avenue. And so anytime I would visit him, which was pretty rare, I never really visited him at the office too much, but one of the things I would always do was go to the Blarney Stone and always get my corned beef, cabbage, and potatoes. They would fill it up to the top. You couldn't even eat the whole thing, and it cost $6. 1978. 78, and I guess I don't know what this is, maybe a record, I'm not quite sure. But you could see he's starting to get a little older here, but he's still, still doing his thing. Here's a great photograph, and we're reaching the end. Beautifully framed photograph. This is the train yard down, I believe, on Dyckman Street, which is still there to this day, although it looks actually pretty much the same, except for the train cars. So here's our last little story, dying breed. Does anyone ever stop to think about all the midgets that one used to see around the city? I know I saw hundreds of them in the Bronx. And do you remember the fidgets? They couldn't even walk through the cars when the trains were moving. Do you remember all the people you would see with the club feet, with the one big black block shoe on one foot and a regular shoe on the other? And how about all the albinos that were seen around town? Does anybody remember the half-bodied guys who used to go skateboarding around through the trains mounted on a piece of plywood with roller skates underneath? What happened to all these people? Don't you ever wonder where they all disappeared to? Then, of course, there were the original hobos from Hell's Kitchen. Or what about the 400-pound shopping lady from the 74th Street and Roosevelt Avenue on the 7 Lines in Queens? Whatever happened to her? These people are long gone. I think you don't see them anymore because they're a dying breed. New York City just doesn't have a place for them anymore. I used to hang out with a lot of the hobos who roam the subways and some of the blind folks too. Interestingly, I met a few people who used to work in the carnivals and the traveling sideshows, and they told me that they had roamed the trains for years. They said that it was about the warmest place they could find in New York City, and they only had to pay their fare once. They never left the subway system again. Most of the subway benches are gone. They were a hobo's paradise where they could just lay down, air out their toes, use a newspaper for a pillow, and sip on a bottle of Thunderbird all through the night. The hobos loved graffiti. When they were bombed on that bum juice and the trains would fly by them, it was like watching TV. And the only channel they had was the New York City subway, which they could see through the day and all through the night. But I'm sorry to say that graffiti is gone. The die-hard bombers have passed on by. In the old days, I was a walking canvas. I had paint everywhere. There was paint splashed all over my clothes and hands, flooded Pilot Magic markers leaking in my pockets, and spray cans sprayed off my sleeves. But New York City is different now. Somehow, we let it all get away from us. And here, here, I must say, here, here. And this is our last photograph. Train conductor saying goodbye to all of us with a rather poorly drawn piece in comparison to what we saw earlier from the great Fuzz One. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for indulging me today. I had a great time reading you these stories, bringing you these photographs. Hopefully, we'll be meeting Fuzz One soon for a walk around in Van Cortlandt Park, where he can regale us with more of his stories. And so on this December 24th, 2022, I just want to say again, thank you so much for being here. Have a very Merry Christmas. Have a very Merry New Year. And we will see you on the next live stream. Thank you very much.